Listening to the music of my guest today brings me some mixed emotions. Firstly, incredible love and admiration for the creativity and innovation of her thinking, and the real beauty and talent in executing this thinking through her composition and playing. Yet all the while still, leaving room for the listener's own interpretation. And the second feeling, and I sort of fight hard against this one, is some regret that my own musical education was more constrained, and I couldn't, or perhaps didn't want to, sort of find a similar path where music and sound can be used so fluidly and experimentally, where there's such a vital and inspirational sort of conduit for connection, whether that be with nature. And believe me, I can give some very current connections on that topic from where I am at the moment. Our environment, our relationships, or ourselves. Anyway, this is all about my guest, not me. And her latest studio album, Ravel in the Forest, is it's a powerful voyage through the natural world that lets you visualize and recapture that word awesome in its purest form. And for me, it's a storybook that really immerses you in the beauty of life. So, Belle Chen, thank you so much for being here today. It's a real honor to chat to you. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Giles. I am looking forward to this chat so much.
Indeed, indeed. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's because you've got the at the time of recording this, you're a week away from it coming out. So
Yes.
maybe just to kind of sort of set the scene for that record. Can you talk about it from your perspective, how it sort of came about, and what was really kind of motivating you to write this record, which is beautiful.
Yeah, so I was looking through my calendar the other day and I realized that I had finished writing the record about 2022, like scoring the compositions,
Yeah,
which meant I started about a year before that. And I remember, I mean, I don't remember dates, I'm terrible with dates, but I remember the emotions and where I
yeah,
was very strongly. And, to understand that, I must share that my personality is someone who is a bit unsure sometimes, a bit
mm,
unsure about a lot of things, about purpose, about life. And I'm always searching in a way to
mm,
look for answers. And there was a period of time where I was looking for answers externally.
yeah,
Because I think in society we live, I found myself kind of looking at, I was registering to the messaging that was provided by, the environment that I was in, the media, social media, all that noise
mm,
of finding aspiration and purpose on an external level. And I
yeah,
think that does something crazy to my head. Like I
mm,
just never felt at ease. And I will be doing things, and sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't. But at any time back then, I felt a sense of unease.
mm,
And I remember there was a point I was in Australia and I decided to take a break and
yeah,
went on a drive. I was based out of Brisbane. And if you drive an hour from Brisbane, a little bit south or a little bit north, you hit two rainforests. They're
mm,
absolutely beautiful. They're really, really ancient.
yeah,
And there was one particular moment where I found myself just staring at this huge, huge tree for a very long time.
yeah,
I didn't even know why I was staring at it. I didn't know, like, I was just so lost at that time.
yeah,
But what I realized that I stood there for a long time and I was realizing how the sound washed over me and it changed as the
yeah,
time progressed.
yeah.
And just suddenly I realized just how actually maybe everything I was looking for was already inside.
Right, right.
And it's very hard to explain in words, but I just remember going, oh, I went back and I wrote
Yeah.
the track. That was the opening track for the album.
It's
Yeah, it's
it's
hard to.
no, I understand. I mean, I understand. I mean, so as far as trees go, um, I maybe about 5 years ago. I mean, I've been doing this podcast for 3 years, but a couple of years before I started this, I've always been interested in the mindset sort of thing, and then I was going on my own sort of kind of personal thing. So and this sort of looking inward. I think that, kind of nature and sort of certainly trees, I started to sort of discover this real power in them. Just just the act of sort of sitting at the bottom of a tree and sort of, getting the power that it kind of emanates. And it was a strange thing. It sort of made me really kind of look inward. It's almost like everything else extraneous is kind of irrelevant.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a sense of presence I felt
Yeah,
as well.
yeah,
That sometimes that feeling comes at specific times to different people at different times of their lives, I guess. And
yeah,
for me,
yeah.
at that time, and that was the time where I began to work on this record.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, were there some, kind of events or things that were sort of happening was this like a buildup of, um, kind of feeling of pressure, almost pressure that you were sort of facing, from the outside world, and perhaps, you were internalizing that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm in London now. That's where I live normally. And I think
Yeah,
it's a fast-paced environment and definitely a lot of
yeah,
pressure. And sometimes, I have friends whose personality I admire. They are able
yeah,
to put the fort,
yeah.
and be quite strong standing in the
Strong.
face of
Yeah,
pressure and expectations
yeah,
and sometimes critical feedback, which is important. But,
yeah,
when you're not in that right mindset, sometimes it can get into your head a little
yeah,
bit
yeah.
and then stay
Absolutely.
there. That's the scary part.
Yeah,
And for me, I think there was a period in my time where my door was quite open and I was just receiving everything
yeah,
and then everything stayed with me, that's
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
It's interesting, this idea of, well, this, that phrase "be strong," and sort of resilience, and
Mm.
how we, kind of like how long we can really keep up that. Um, I mean, I'd call it a facade. Facade is probably not quite the right word, but it's almost like you sort of put up a front of, it's like the sort of stoicism, and
Yeah,
but I wonder how long that can, you can kind of suppress whatever it is you're being stoical about.
yeah, I think it'll always come out. And if
Comes
I had
out, doesn't
learned
it?
yeah, if I had learned anything in my own experiences, like it's better to process in real time, like in a balanced way.
Yes,
Just
I agree.
step away for a little bit,
Yeah.
frequently, so it's not a build up.
I mean, sometimes we have like, in society, and, I mean, I live in London as well, and there's, this there can be this, what's the right way to put it? The sort of feeling that if you display your emotions, that, it's a sign of weakness, and maybe, public figures like yourself maybe probably feel that pressure more. But, it's,
Mm.
it's false. It's completely false. I mean, it's, where you're trying to sort of suppress those and sort of put on this sort of facade. I just don't think it works. I know exactly what you mean and what you feel, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think what I am working on right now, actually, as we speak, is to find the alignment of be able to express emotions
Yeah,
in a way that's constructive, I guess. So instead
yeah,
of being all the time, let that through in a very vulnerable and honest manner
yeah,
and allow people to connect with it as well. And I find that works better for me because I'm not trying to be something
yeah.
while I'm expressing something else. I'm letting it flow quite honestly. And
So
that's
was
been
it? Sorry, no, go on. No, carry on, Beryl.
oh, and yeah, and that's been incredible because I think the audience feels it as well.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a more natural flow, I guess, in
Does
exchange.
does this record? Would it be right to say that it was a little bit cathartic writing this record then?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's
Mm,
a journey inward for me. And
mm,
kind of like with this record, I wanted to create a space where the listeners could also feel playful and free
mm,
and safe to be vulnerable and just
mm.
imagine. just to tap into those emotions that's always been there for a long time,
Yeah.
but not have been allowed to happen.
Allowed. Yeah.
And for that to happen on the record, I experienced it myself, and that was like my process of actually
Yeah.
creating. Yeah.
Is this something that, that challenge that you've had to 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 display that more outwardly? Is that something
Mm.
that you've struggled with? Because I did, when like from growing up, and I think back to there's so many parts of my life where I always sort of think back to, when I was a kid, those real sort of formative influences and the sort of the influences that I took from, particularly my parents. I mean, I'm an only child, and taking those, their behavior, they were open in some ways, but so closed in other ways. And I can see
Mm.
myself, it's been, in some of my own behavior, and think,
Mm.
sometimes things are a struggle. It's like really uncomfortable inside you when you think,
Yeah.
oh, I don't want to talk about this, but I know I should do.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think with family, it's interesting. I think there's an unspoken, they give you the biological DNA, but there's also an
Yeah.
emotional, something a bit deeper that's passed on, isn't it, generation
Yes.
generation. And I definitely felt that, I'm the oldest in my family, and I
Mm,
was a very good kid growing up all the time.
yeah.
And that's actually learned behavior. And so I think I found myself, like I found myself yeah, just being very good and very, like just easy to deal with, I guess,
Yeah.
in my upbringing. But that kind of runs head on with what I'm doing that I'm passionate about. Because
Yeah.
I think as artists, you want to say something, you gotta say something. And for that to be
Yeah.
heard in most all the noise, you gotta say it really strong.
Yeah.
And that against, pull everything back and just be easy is a bit like, so I don't know, it's
Yeah.
an ongoing journey for me. I'm figuring it out.
So, again, going back to sort of childhood and starting music, because I'm sure there are, I know that when you talk about that, how you started and your kind of journey through to, let's say, I don't know, yeah, from when you started through to like when you were about 18, 19, something like that, because that I feel is there's going to be some parallels with myself. And like I mentioned in the intro, there are some, uh it made me think about my own kind of journey. I mean, I was classically trained in the cello
Mm.
when I was from sort of 7 years old. So I'm interested in your kind of journey and how you found that at that young age, getting
Mm.
into music.
Yeah, I think studying classical music as a child was interesting because it taught me
Mm,
discipline. So,
yeah.
like I always tell people when they ask me about how I got into music,
Yeah.
and there's literally no romantic story. There's no like, like grandfather's collection of CDs. I didn't
Yes.
have it. I was a complete blank canvas, and so I
Yeah.
started. I enjoyed it. I
Mm,
loved the piano because it was vast.
mm,
Wasn't on that romantic level. And I just remember when I was a teenager, we moved around a lot, and um, it was hard for me to keep friends actually because I just kept
mm,
moving around.
yeah.
I found I was processing my emotions on the piano a lot.
Right.
Um, but back then I was still playing repertoire.
Mm,
And so I knew how important music was for me on that kind of level of life, I guess, as a communication tool.
yeah.
But it still didn't feel quite like who I was. And so I went
Yeah.
into uni and studied classical piano performance, did the
Mm,
competition route,
mm,
came to London and studied and did the competition route. And it was
yeah.
in London where I felt the first time that I could be who I am because I
Right.
realized there are just so many people around. It didn't
Interesting.
matter what I do, actually.
Yeah. It's
And
fascinating.
And so I could finally, instead of being like an actor, acting out a script that maybe someone wrote, like a
Yeah.
piece someone wrote, I started to look into ways that I could create
Yeah.
to tell the story as well. And so I went through different paths. At first, working with sound recordings, like field recordings,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
improvisation, like cafe auto style, very avant-garde. And then
Yeah.
eventually I came around to composition, like where I am now, in a more kind of post-classical but experimental way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's, I mean,
Mm.
that's a fantastic, just in the, in terms of your discography, I think that's a really fascinating evolution. I love the idea of, kind of field recordings and, those kind of soundscapes and using those. I think that's a phenomenal way to sort of create music. But what I love is how you then evolved, from that as well. Like you say, you're still kind of experimental, but using more, electronics and synths and,
Yeah.
things like that, and but still retaining that, yeah, that experimental, kind of like avant-garde way of writing and then playing.
Yeah, and I think that's very much a reflection of my personality, I guess.
Yeah, yeah,
I think my family is what is often called first generation immigrants. And I
yeah,
think people to move from one country to another, there needs to be, we teach ourselves a very strong ability to adapt and absorb.
yeah,
And then also to know that not every rule is correct. Like there's no right and
yeah,
wrong in the broader
yeah,
sense. And I guess that's a direct reflection of my journey like that, because I don't see, I guess some people talk about genre and they see very specifically what's going on. And with me, I
yeah.
don't
You don't see
look at
that.
music like that. I don't understand music like that. So,
That's really interesting because I mean my kind of when I started music, um, my dad was classically trained, and he was a sort of pianist, but he was more of a singer,
mhm,
sung classical in choirs, and he really wanted me to get into music. He really did. He kind of sort of pushed me. And
mm,
this is when I was 8 years old, and I did all my exams, and I did really well in them. But there was always that feeling that I was kind of being pushed, and kind of 12, 11, 12 years old, having to come in from playing with my friends and sort of have like you mentioned discipline, having the discipline to sort of practice. It grated
mm.
on me after a while, and I started, I think ultimately the reason I packed it in was kind of resentment. And but it's so this is an interesting one, and that kind of stayed with me. And both my parents died a couple of years ago, and I kind of, when my dad especially was getting his health was failing a bit, and it felt like I had this sort of unfinished business. I know he was desperately disappointed when I gave it up, and so I went into a shop in London, into the Yamaha store in Soho, and asked to sort of
Mm.
play a cello, and the memories and the feelings that came back. I hadn't picked it up for 30 years at
Mhm.
least, and I picked it up, and it was
Yeah,
just like all this stuff came flooding back.
yeah, yeah, beautiful. Yeah, that that's almost like a little bit of what I was talking about was something that you carry inside and it
Yeah,
always has
it is.
and it stays with you. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's such a beautiful story. Yeah.
yeah, it's really really incredible. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I liked what you said also about adaptability, with the family, moving around and you learn to adaptability, because I think adaptability is just these days in the world that we live in, because it's changing so quickly, it's so volatile, it's so uncertain,
Yeah.
that almost adaptability. I mean, one of the reasons that I got into doing so being so interested in mindset is that these kind of characteristics and traits that we carry, like adaptability, things that we learn, are almost like more important than some of the technical stuff that I'm not just talking about musicians, but in anything, they're almost like more important. That if you can't be adaptable in how you're living your life, it's going to be a struggle these days.
Yeah, I think it will be quite difficult. And I think adaptability comes in so many different forms as well.
Yeah,
It comes on, there's music and there's also the relationships
yeah,
between the people making music and the
yeah,
people listening to music. And
yeah,
then there's also like, after creating the marketing aspect as well,
yeah, yeah, Yeah.
things. There are infinite ways of getting things completed, if I say that,
Yes.
like very
Yeah.
technical.
Yeah.
And some things work better for other people and
Mm,
not myself. That's what I've learned actually. I
yeah.
remember going through this period where I felt like, social media is an interesting thing for me because I
Yeah.
appreciate it in the way that it can allow me to connect with people around the world.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
like on a personal level at my fingertip. Like it's
Yes.
so, but at the same time, I struggle a little bit because then sometimes things become a number and
Yeah.
almost like a popularity contest. I'm not sure.
Agreed.
You
Yeah.
feel
I
of
totally hear you.
because that's like putting a quantity onto a piece of art. Like
Yeah.
music is intangible. Like how would you
I
contact,
totally
like
agree.
it's strange. It's a strange thing for me. And I found myself going, okay, I want to be on social media to talk to people and share my music.
Yeah.
So I'm on there. And I'm on there going, okay, so if I'm like diligent about it, I'll reach,
Yeah.
this many people and, the more people get to hear my music. And of course, the platforms sometimes favor people of a certain personality
Yep.
and certain way of like, communication. And I found
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like a period of time where I was just like, oh, it's very hard for me because I was not
Yeah.
seeing the results when I was putting in the time. But then I thought to myself, where do I see my music and where do
Yeah.
I see I guess what my music can do to serve other people?
Yeah.
And is it through the really fast scrolling content on social media? Maybe
Yeah.
sometimes, but not at its core, maybe. And that's when I gave myself a bit more room to breathe and just go, hey, it's okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to participate in what everyone is assuming that you have to
In
participate
this,
in.
yeah, in this kind of game. I remember listening to. I think you're totally right. I remember listening to a podcast. It was the Ezra Klein show from the New York Times, and he had a I forget who his guest was, but he was talking about about sort of social media and the sort of the fallacy of likes
Mm.
and things like that, and how many comments you kind of get on it, and there are so many reasons why somebody wouldn't click that like button, yet it's still a metric that's used.
Yeah,
And it's hard to not do it when it's your livelihood. And
yeah,
you want to get you're playing music for the love, but also it's a livelihood. Everybody who starts out as a musician, most people want to become musicians full time, give up the part-time jobs and so forth. And it's really hard not to focus on those metrics when it's sort of shoved down your throat every day
every day.
by
Yeah,
these
yeah.
people, by these sort of monoliths that have no kind of interest in your life. It's just
Mm.
insane, but it's very hard to ignore at the same time.
Yeah. So I've kind of like through that experience taught myself to see if I can emotionally disconnect with what's actually
Disconnect.
going on here. Yeah, because I think if I don't find myself emotionally disconnect with the results, especially when it comes to social media, it's
Yeah,
very hard. Because when I make
yeah,
music, it's personal. Like as I
yeah.
was saying before, because it's so personal.
So personal.
But yeah, yeah. So I just found myself going, okay, to set my boundaries and allow myself to be myself and keep creating in a way that's genuine to me.
Yeah,
Um, I need to emotionally disengage with the feedback from social media in terms of metrics. In
yeah,
terms of people who write to me, I love connecting with people, but in terms of
yeah.
metrics, I leave it alone and I just observe and I go, it's part of the process. It's fine.
I mean, that's a really good way of handling it. Really, really good. I think it's really important, to be able
Oh,
to
yeah.
do that. It can just drain so much energy and take up so much time for very little. Well, in fact, not very, but it's detriment can be sort of detrimental. I really believe that. What
Mm.
how have you in your career, um how have you handled or your own self-belief, in what you're doing?
That is something I'm constantly working on.
Yeah,
Gosh, I don't know. Like music for me is quite like part of my personality and part of my life.
Yeah.
And I have also part of my personality that's quite anxiety prone, if I say that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
I
so there
understand.
will be
Yeah.
really good days where I will turn up and I can be totally creative,
Yeah.
show up on stage and really like intact. But there are days where it's just hard and
It's
everything's
hard.
hard.
Yeah.
And it's hard and it's scary. That's the
Yeah.
thing that's anxiety prone. Excuse me.
Mm.
And yeah, I don't know. I feel like this, unfortunately for me, or fortunately for me, is maybe my life lesson to figure
Mm.
out. And
Yeah.
maybe I will do that through my music.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't have an answer to you. Like every time
Mm.
I doubts or every time I have to deliver when I'm not maybe in the right, mindset to,
Mindset for it. Yeah.
I just remind myself of why I'm doing this
Mm.
and my genuine love music and wish to share as well.
Yeah.
And that helps a lot. And just like push everything else away. Like, all that other things are kind of secondary.
Yeah.
And once I focus back on the reason why I'm actually making music, it always helps me in a way.
You mentioned a few minutes ago about when you were talking about the family moving around and I think I'm right to say this difficulty with friends, kind of
Mm,
like establishing friends. I mean,
yeah.
how did you kind of find your people that have stayed with you and have kind of stayed with you now, or do you find because I've found this somewhat that as I've got older and as my identity has changed as my I don't think I'm pretty sure that my values haven't changed, but perhaps what I want from life has.
Mm,
And I think also because the world is sort of quite divided, it's kind of quite there's a lot of tension that
yeah.
some of my friendships have fallen by the
Mm.
wayside as well. And I wonder if this is just a natural characteristic that we can move in and out of friendships as our identity shifts.
Yeah, that's a great question. I thought about it for a very long time because I used to be quite envious when I meet people who have had childhood friends from primary
Yeah,
school, and that
yeah,
shares such a long period of memory, and there's a lot of trust,
mm,
and it goes way back. With me, I don't have that, and
yeah,
there was a time where I questioned myself, why don't I have that, and why don't I, you know, what am I not doing to
yeah,
secure that? And right now, because it's an ongoing thing, isn't it? Like figuring out
yes,
who you
yeah,
are. And for me right now,
yeah,
I've accepted the fact that I'm more of a transient person.
yeah,
You move through different crowds because you
yeah,
change and you shed your skin. And it's
yes,
not because you don't care for the people who are in your previous environment. It's more just like the things in common shifts over
agreed.
time. And it's okay to move on, actually, sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and I definitely agree that it can be hard as well, can't it, to accept that because we get used to is this I think sort of this idea of looking backwards at your relationship with somebody 20 years ago, and you remember the good times, blah blah blah, and it's all good, or you remember the bad times, but that's a certain time in your life, and things
Mm.
change, but it's hard not to be sometimes sad about those good times, that you had. But it is part of. I completely agree. It is part of life, and I like that you sort of come to terms with that and have accepted that is part of your identity shift.
Yeah, for sure. I think it comes back to when I realized there's no right and wrong ways,
Yeah,
that it's kind of like then actually the way I am and the way that things move around me, I guess, as well.
yeah, yeah,
Fine. It's absolutely fine. It may not have been normalized, by
yeah,
media, something, but it's also there are other people also going through the same thing, I'm sure.
yeah. I
Yeah.
like what you said earlier as well about rule books. You know, about rule
Mm.
books, basically kind of like, well, who wrote the rule books?
Yeah.
You know, and why does that rule book have to apply to me? You know,
Yeah.
it shouldn't do. I mean, that's really interesting, and I love that you've taken that on and taken that on as a kind of challenge to say, well, you know, this rule book doesn't apply to me. You know, I can write my own. Totally right.
Yeah. It's probably more from the perspective that I don't completely understand why the rules are written sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You know, you
absolutely.
just look at it and going, yeah, it kind of makes sense written down, but it doesn't quite make sense on the understanding level.
Yeah.
So that's
I think
yeah, maybe.
I mean it's interesting because you know there are rule books for every kind of part of our life, you know,
Mhm.
and you know I come from, you know, kind of like, you know, sort of white male middle class family, and you know, I mean that's who wrote the rule books in a lot of parts of our life, and you know what has contributed to, you know, kind of what are societal norms now. But
Mhm.
you know, there are so many things that have been around that are irrelevant and are not right for kind of large groups of people. And I think it's totally right that, you know, those rules should be questioned in whatever part, and say, you know, well, why? Just because it's there doesn't mean that it's right, or things have to be done that way.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think like everyone of us should think whether that makes sense to them
Yeah.
on a personal level, because otherwise, I don't know. Like you mentioned the word resentment,
Mm,
and I think that's a word that people don't talk about, but it's actually quite
yeah.
important because I think the feeling of resentment comes from not doing what you actually feel that's true to
Yes.
yourself, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And if we're not questioning all the time, going, who am I and what do I, you know, want from living this life,
Yeah.
and then look at the rules being communicated and think, oh,
Yeah.
does it actually align? Does it make sense? Then there's going to be like this kind of hidden, almost unconscious build-up
Yeah.
of resentment if you're doing
Yes.
something that you don't know why you're doing.
Yeah.
And
We,
so,
we
yeah.
were you encouraged in the you know in your career and the you know the path that you were taking, the approach that you were taking, were you encouraged the way through your childhood by your parents and family and
Um,
friends?
I think I learn a lot from other people by observing them and how they
Yeah.
behave, probably more
Yeah.
than what they say, because sometimes people say something,
Yeah.
but that actually means something else. So someone
Something
can be
else.
highly, highly critical and really harsh, but if you
Mm,
observe them, they are trying to do this because they want to be kind to you to communicate something.
yeah.
But that just happened to be the way they know how to communicate.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know why. Like I just observed a lot of people and
Mm,
then I started thinking about me and how they sit. I
mm,
mean, to be fair, like the first 2 years at uni with a competition circuit, I had a lot of knockbacks.
yeah.
You know, for some people things go really smoothly
Yeah.
and their career start really young, they find themselves really early and they
Yeah.
take off. For me, I spent a long time just looking for myself and I had a lot of feedback from different people, sometimes quite harsh feedback and quite harsh realizations of reality of what
Mm,
uh, family means, what community actually means.
yeah.
And then that's when I'm like, yeah, okay, like I don't think it's right for me to seek kind of emotional, I don't know, dependence, if you want to say it that way,
Mm,
based on the structure around me because they're
yeah.
not really there. And so I
Mm.
need to find it for myself.
Has, does your instinct, you know, kind of gut instinct, does that play quite a big role in how you move through life?
Uh, yes, I think I'm really self-aware in a way. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
and sort of instinctive. I have this. I trust my instinct, but
yeah.
I also have this. I've got to trust my instinct more in recent years, for sure. But I also have this competing. um, characteristic, which is to analyze things.
Hmm.
And it used to drive me nuts that I'd sort of be having this instinct that was saying, "Oh, just go for it," and then I'd be having this analytical side of it saying, "Well, let's look at the options."
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah, yeah. It's a push and pull, kind of tug
It
of
is
war. Kind of,
exactly.
yeah, 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 yeah. So what do you do then? Like, how do you decide or
I think I
look
I think
through?
what I do now, I use my instinct a lot more. I think I've just coached myself to do that, or maybe the alternative way of looking at it is that I've just driven myself insane with the amount of analysis that I was doing. That I just thought, you can't carry on living like this. I'm probably making it sound worse than it was, but I would analyze things, and I would have to get to a sort of position where basically kind of that analytical side was satisfied.
Hmm.
That was the one that had to be satisfied before I would I would make decisions. But it's interesting. But I'm just thinking. But in some areas of my life, I would just say I would just decide to do something if it felt right. It was a weird thing. It wasn't in all parts, but some parts of my life, it was there was definitely this tension there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I don't know. Having an analytical kind of a mind is great sometimes,
Yeah,
but sometimes I know what you mean. Like it kind of slows it down and you make you second guess.
slows the pace down. Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. But sometimes, like, have you ever had experiences where you felt something so strongly from your gut?
Yeah.
You're trying to make sense of it, but you can't really. And it's such a strong feeling. But then your
Yeah.
analytical mind then comes in
Yeah.
and then figures it out. And then
Yes.
have, uh,
Well, I did like a master's degree a few about sort of seven years ago, and uh, um, one of the things that we were studying was instinct, and I guess this is how I got interested in it. And there was a study that was done of some financial traders about kind of when they decide to kind of sell or buy certain stocks or whatever. They were fairly complex trades anyway.
hmm.
And some I can't remember the detail, but they managed to look at measure kind of heart rate as as the measure of instinct,
Oh,
and
cool.
it was
Yeah.
really interesting that analytical side could almost didn't count for anything. It was just really kind of like a gut feeling. Did it feel right? And they would do it. So it kind of is it is a thing.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
I just found that fascinating that something so intangible
Hmm.
can be so powerful. But
Yeah.
it's like other things like um emotional intelligence as well. I mean, I'm just like I'm a huge believer in emotional intelligence, and I wonder in in what you do with any collaborations, and collaborations can mean your producers, co-writers, engineers, whatever. How you handle those relationships, and whether you notice that kind of things like empathy for what the other person is sort of feeling is becoming more important part of your life.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think empathy and being understanding, I think, is really
Mm,
important in the collaboration process because you just don't know what the other person's going through in their own life as well.
yeah, yeah,
And sometimes we all turn up and we all turn up, like, say, to studio,
yeah,
but you just don't know what happened on the way there and what happens on the broader scale with family and friends or whatever.
yeah, yeah,
And, with creative processes, very often we look for that spark.
yeah,
And sometimes sparks come from tension. And I
yeah,
think,
yes,
yeah, yeah, right. And
definitely,
yeah, and I think I'm very lucky to have found a group of people that when the sparks happen, we know we have a mutual understanding going, yeah, that stays in the room of what's happening
yeah,
here. And we close the door and then it's fine afterwards.
it's interesting.
And yeah, and clear communication as well, and not taking anything personally is
Yeah,
important, I think.
so that's an interesting one. taking things personally. So if it, one area that I found difficult is you know where you create something where it's kind of it's your baby, it's your thing,
Mm.
and somebody will come with some ideas and how I sometimes struggled with that. I sometimes and I've been able to sort of pinpoint it again back to my childhood, but I would take things a little bit personally,
Mm.
almost as a sort of criticism. And now sometimes it depends on the way that it's said and who the person is that's saying it, but it's like I wanted it to be like this. You've invested so much time and energy in it, and I want it to
Mm.
be like this because I think that it's right, but somebody comes with a different perspective.
Yeah, yeah. I think, yeah, if you're writing your own chart and there's a suggestion, definitely that feeling, I understand very clearly what you mean.
Yeah.
Um, I think when I was younger, I would just be like, no, this is my way, like,
Yeah.
but now I'm not that, I'm a bit more seasoned. I go, interesting, let's step away and give it some time because maybe it
Yeah.
will be better
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
allow that piece to have a life of its own,
Mm.
shared experience. And sometimes, I may come back and go, no, that's definitely,
Yeah.
not better. And I'll explain why. And usually people are like, okay, it's
So,
go back the other way.
so you give those ideas time to sink in, to breathe, and to you give those
Yeah.
ideas the time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Unless it's like something that's totally outrageous that,
Yeah.
reverses that, yeah, probably not.
And
Then,
then probably not.
yeah, yeah, write them off straight away. But other suggestions, yeah, definitely, at least overnight to think about it.
With the the experimental nature of your music, do you find that you need that to kind of keep your own your own brain engaged? It kind of feeds your creativity to be thinking that, okay, I want to try different things.
With me, it comes a bit more naturally than that, actually. Sometimes,
Yeah.
or coming from an instrument, or
Yeah.
sometimes I go to an instrument shop actually, and I'll see something I haven't touched before. And I think my first instinct is to find things that are strange that I can do on it. Sometimes for
Amazing.
no reason,
Yeah.
actually. I'm just like,
Yeah.
I wonder what the boundary of this particular instrument could be.
Yeah.
Um, and that, for a strange reason, satisfy me. Like the act of
Yeah.
doing that, just like to go, yeah, that's that crunch. I love that.
Wow.
Um, and then after I've done that, whether that is factored into actual piece of music, that comes later, I think. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But it's a case of
Mm.
yeah, getting the ideas. I remember I did a podcast with the James Spectrum from Pepe Deluxe, and I think on their last album he had this incredible um, German kind of like an organ that had been found in I think it was like in a cave somewhere, kind of like in Germany. It was really incredible, and it was all about the okay, well, we've got to try this and see, kind of like how we can sort of build this into the music. And I just think those sound because music is so, it can take you to such a ability to take you to a time and a place that though,
Mhm.
through the sounds and the way that you sort of play things, I just think it I just find it fascinating when those new instruments or those perhaps unknown or lesser known instruments come along, you give them a try and see what happens. It's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. I love doing that. I think, yeah, it's so cool. I must have a listen to that album
Yes,
without
I'll s-
all
I'll s- I'll s- I'll send it to
these.
you. When we finish, I'll just sort of send you in the chat. It's really really interesting. I forget the name of the track, but I can find it for sure.
Amazing. Wow.
I mean, with this, would you call yourself a curious person?
Curious person. Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah,
I'm always questioning, so I guess I am.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Again, I think again that's something that's, again to question things, sort of show curiosity. Because I guess in today's world, we have so much, when I'm thinking about the internet, for example, there's so much information there. I wonder if that can is detrimental to curiosity because it is there. But then again, at the same time, you have to go and look for it. So it still is.
Mm.
I don't know. It's an interesting because like when I was a kid and I was sort of finding new music, I was literally going to a shop and I would decide whether to get the record pretty much based on the artwork on the cover.
Yeah.
No idea what it sounded like inside.
Remember that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's so different now.
Total
Hey.
potluck. It's totally different, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely changed. And I don't know. How do you feel about this change? It's had its good and bad, I guess. It's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's yeah, good and bad. I mean, I don't think anything can replace that thrill of going into a shop and seeing a record cover that I remember. I used to get this with like the first bands that I really loved. Bands like Susie and the Banshees and Killing Joke and Adam and the Ants. And almost it was
Mm.
almost like the artwork. Um, It's kind of like Alice through the Looking Glass. You'd sort of look into this, or Narnia, you would look into this world that felt completely different to mine, and it was really
Mm.
exciting. That was really exciting. Just sort of looking at that, and that was such a thrill as a kid, such a thrill. And I don't think anything's ever matched that since.
Yeah, that's interesting. Looking through a looking glass into the artist's world.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yesterday we had a listen back event
Mm.
at Platoon who's releasing this album. So it's just a small group of people, quite
Yeah.
private. And the whole thing is like one of those playback events where you dim the lights to quite dark and
Yeah.
you play through the entire album.
Yeah.
Initially, I went into the session going, I'm not sure because I think culture these days, people seem to, want a lot of stimulation.
Yeah.
And I just wonder what the impact would be to play an entire album, which is quite long, 46 minutes,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
in a dark where there's nothing to look at.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. Oh, yeah.
yeah, so I felt quite nervous watching people walk in, and
Yeah.
I had a chat with some people coming out, and it's interesting. And a couple of people had mentioned that they haven't listened to an entire album through,
Mm.
so, and not doing anything else.
Yeah.
And that's quite incredible.
Yeah.
It's what we're talking about reminded me of that. It's shifted in a way.
Yeah. Because
And
yeah, you're right. I mean, I certainly make. I mean, I guess because from doing this, I have to do, but also I'm interested in listening to albums all the way through. I enjoy seeing, if I can build a picture of a kind of story, a story
mm,
that's building through the album. There's a in the 10, 12 tracks or however many you put on the album, there's a reason
mm,
that they're there in that order more often than
yeah,
not.
yeah,
And so I like to try and see how it built, what sort of picture it builds in my own mind through listening to it. And that was certainly the case, back in the day. That was certainly the case. But the culture now, because of the immediacy, is much more around um, you know, singles,
yeah,
playlists,
yes, yeah,
which I think sorry, it's maybe because I'm getting old, but it just sort of feels that that's not quite doing the artist justice by just listening to those kind of. I mean, I understand, putting out singles and one-off tracks. There's a
mm,
reason for doing that, but I love listening to albums because it goes. I think it goes deeper.
yes. It's a complete journey, I think. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
but I wonder, like, I'm quite curious about it because I think children they're growing up now.
yeah.
I think it's normal for them, like the playlisting and the
It is.
like they grew up like that. Whereas, we had the CDs and the albums, they had the playlists. And so
Yeah,
I wonder what's going to happen in 20 years' time when they are older as well.
yeah. I mean, I think as well. It's perhaps another thing that has contributed to how we struggle to keep our attention spans for
Mm,
kind of like longer than 30 seconds.
yes, yeah.
you
I
know,
find that in myself sometimes as well. Yeah, I
yeah,
think,
absolutely. I mean, I
yeah,
must admit, I struggle much more these days to read a book than I used to,
yeah,
and I hate
yeah.
myself for it.
It's an act of committing to something, isn't it? Like you got to put
Yes,
everything away and
yeah,
commit, and then settle in. Yeah,
exactly,
it does feel like it requires a bit more effort because then you got to put things away first to settle in.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
no distractions, just kind of
yeah,
go away.
yeah. Gosh, this
Oh
book's
wow.
yeah.
Well, there we
So
go. So right now we're a week away. We're a week away from, as we're recording this, from the music coming out. How are you feeling?
excited and nervous at the same
Yeah,
time.
yeah. Is that usual?
I feel it more with this album for some reason
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it is maybe because I'm more vulnerable in this album
yeah,
than I've been in my
yeah,
previous ones. It's more exposed.
yeah.
So yeah, yeah. A bit so the feeling's a bit more like, high. Yeah.
Bit more, a bit high. Yeah, a bit more. Yeah,
Stronger.
the stronger and sort of
Yeah,
differences in the sort of the feelings as well. Well,
yeah.
it's if it's anything, I think it's a fantastic piece of work. It really does sort of take you on a kind of journey, and I think it deserves that time where you just immerse yourself in it and just listen to it and let yourself go with it. I think it's a fantastic record, though. So best of luck with it.